We're living in days where we see a lot of our world leaders. You can't turn on the television without seeing either President Trump or Prime Minister Trudeau or many of the premiers or world leaders. We're seeing a lot of leaders in our day, and we're seeing what kind of leaders they are and how they are leading. And I was reminded by seeing these leaders of my own journey of leadership. I began life really as a very excruciatingly shy person, as a very quiet lad. And I did have one passion in life, and that was airplanes. I wanted to earn my pilot's license, so I joined Air Cadets. And I did, in fact, earn my license through Air Cadets. But while I was in Air Cadets, well, I'd spent about a year in Air Cadets and got to the lowest ranking LAC leading Air Cadet. And, well, we moved from Hamilton to Kincardine. And there in Kincardine, they were starting a brand new squadron. Brand new. And so, despite the fact that I was just at the bottom as an LAC, I was actually one of the highest ranking cadets there. Because there were all these new people to cadets who had never been in it before. I was one of the highest ranking and the most experienced. And so I was given quite a bit of responsibility right off the bat. And so I had to learn quickly how to, well, get through my quietness and my shyness and begin to lead. And begin to lead in drill, begin to teach, and all these kinds of things. Indeed, I've often said if it wasn't for Air Cadets, I wouldn't be a pastor today. But despite all that, my quietness, my shyness, actually still shines through my style of leadership. And maybe you can think of what kind of leader you are, or what kind of influence you bear on people. And we're talking about leadership because Jesus, as he enters into Jerusalem, is saying, hey, I'm not just a miracle worker. I'm not just a teacher. I'm also your king. The way he rode in on a donkey. We can read about that in Matthew chapter 21. This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey. And so there we have Jesus, by coming into Jerusalem the way he did, signifying, hey, I'm the king. I am actually your leader. Not only was he saying that he was the leader, he was also saying what kind of leader he is. The kind of leader who can ride into Jerusalem on a donkey and not on a war horse. The kind of leader who doesn't need to wage war, but the kind of leader who brings peace, rather. He's the kind of leader who is approachable, and we see that in the life and teachings of Jesus, how approachable he was by anyone and everyone. The kind of leader that cared for the people, the kind of leader that brings peace, not war, the kind of leader who helps people, the kind of leader who cares. Jesus gave another hint about the kind of leader he is. When we can think of some of the miracles, we think of how he fed thousands of people on several occasions. And on a couple of those occasions, it is said right in the New Testament that he made people lie down on green grass. Does that remind you of a passage of Scripture? He maketh me lie down in green pastures. Well, Psalm 23. And Jesus there is really pointing out that Psalm 23 is pointing to him. And in Psalm 23, we find that David, King David, though he was the king, and in those days kings would often be known as shepherds, King David would say, while you all call me king, yet God, he is my king. The Lord is my king. He is my leader. And he is a good leader. He is the kind of leader that cares about us. He is the kind of leader who cares for us. He's the kind of leader, as it says in Psalm 23, that restores my soul. The kind of leader who leads me in right paths. The kind of leader who even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we need not fear evil, for his rod and his staff, they comfort. The kind of leader who prepares a table before us in the presence of my enemies. And that kind of leader, David looks to the Lord as his leader, as his king, even as people look to David as their king. And so Jesus comes on the scene and says, I am the shepherd. In fact, he went ahead and said, I am the good shepherd in John chapter 10. I am the good shepherd that lays down his life for the sheep, in fact. That's the kind of shepherding Jesus does for us, in willing to give his life for us at the cross. I am the good shepherd, he says. He's showing what kind of leader he is, the kind of leader who cares for his people. Jesus goes on to say more about that, but actually the book of Revelation goes on to speak more about Jesus as a shepherd. Consider these verses from the book of Revelation. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Here we have a passage of Scripture that looks to the future. And here we can look forward to the Lamb at the center of the throne. That's Jesus. And he will be their shepherd. And he will guide them to springs of the water of life. That's the kind of king that Jesus is. That's the kind of leader that Jesus is. The kind of leader who can lead us right through the worst that life can throw at us, even death. He's the kind of leader that leads us to the springs of the water of life. So what kind of king is Jesus? He's the kind of king who has authority over life, over death. He's the kind of king that has authority. And yet the kind of king who's humble enough to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. The kind of king who cares enough to give his life at the cross. He's the kind of king who is so kind to his subjects that he doesn't call them subjects, he calls them friend. And in fact, gives them the opportunity, the possibility, the right to become sons and daughters of God. This is the kind of king that we look to in our day. David looked to the Lord as king. He looked to the Lord and said, "He is my shepherd, no matter how many troubles I have faced." And in these days, if we're facing troubles, or even if we're not, although I think we all are right now, we can look to the Lord as our shepherd. He has authority, but he also cares so much for you and for me. David said, "The Lord is my shepherd." Do you know the Lord as your shepherd?